"I'm throwing out your late husband's junk," my son David said. The words didn't just hang in the air, they pierced it. They shot through the dusty silence of the attic and went straight into my heart, sharp and cold as an icicle. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was looking at the box. His eyes, once so warm, so full of laughter and a reflection of his father's kindness, were now flat and impatient. "David," I started, my voice barely a whisper. It sounded as frail as I felt, as frail as he believed me to be. "Please, not that one. That was your father's." "It's clutter, Mom," he sighed, the sound heavy with an annoyance he no longer bothered to hide. He hefted the small mahogany box in his hand. "It's all just junk. We need to clear this place out. Melissa is right. We can't live in a museum." Ah, Melissa, of course, his new wife. She had been in his life for 6 months and in our house for 2. And in that time, I had watched the son I raised evaporate, replaced by this cold stranger who saw his entire childhood, his entire family history, as clutter. She was standing in the doorway now, her arms crossed, a look of impatient pity on her face. It was the look one gives a senile old woman, not a mother. The box wasn't large, but it held a life, our life. It was the box my Arthur, my late husband, had kept on his desk for 40 years. It was carved from dark mahogany with a small tarnished brass latch. When you opened it, it always smelled of him, a faint, comforting scent of pipe tobacco, old paper, and the sawdust from his workshop. "It's not junk, David," I tried again, taking a weak step forward. The attic floorboards creaked under my feet. It has. His medals, the letters your grandfather sent him during the war, our wedding announcement." My hand fluttered to my chest. "Please, son, just let me keep that one." David just shook his head, a muscle working in his jaw. He was a man in a hurry to take over, to liquidate, to move on, in a hurry to erase the man whose name he carried. "Mom, we've been over this. We're selling the house. All this stuff has to go. The agent said depersonalize. That's what we're doing. It's for the best." "Selling? Selling the house?" I let my voice crack, let the genuine shock I felt at his bluntness mix with the performance I was now forced to give. "David, this is our home." "It was," Melissa interjected, her voice smooth and sharp like glass. "Now it's just a drain. The upkeep is too much for you, Clara. And frankly, it's too much for us to manage. We're getting you a lovely room at the Sunrise Villa. You'll be much more comfortable there." Sunrise Villa. It sounded like a brochure, not a home. It was a place you sent people to forget and to be forgotten. David wouldn't meet my eyes. He was ashamed, I knew it. But the shame wasn't strong enough to fight Melissa's ambition. He turned his back to me, the box still in his hand. "This is the first step, Mom," he said, his voice hard, trying to convince himself as much as me. "It's better to just rip the Band-Aid off. You don't need this junk to remember Dad by." He started for the stairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could feel the familiar sting of tears, but I held them back. Not yet. I couldn't break down. Not really. I had to let him think he was breaking me. "He loved you so much, David," I whispered to his retreating back. "He was so proud of you. He built that soapbox derby car with you. The wheel is in that box. The little blue ribbon you won." He stopped for a second. I saw his shoulders tense. I had hit a nerve. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to his father with a scraped knee. But then Melissa glided up behind him, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "Don't let her guilt you, darling," she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "It's old wood and faded ribbon. It's not memory, it's hoarding. We're doing this for her." He nodded, his body relaxing under her touch, his resolve hardening again. He continued down the stairs. I followed, my feet heavy, my old bones aching with the chill that had nothing to do with the draft in the attic. I stood at the front door, wrapped in my thin cardigan, and watched him walk to his shiny new SUV, a car Melissa had picked out, a car I knew he couldn't really afford. He opened the trunk where other bags and boxes of his junk were already piled. He looked at the mahogany box one last time. I held my breath. I prayed he would open it. I prayed he would look inside and see the dried rose from our first date, the small, tarnished silver locket, the faded photograph of him as a baby in Arthur's arms. I prayed he would see the junk that made up a life. But he didn't. He saw only an obstacle. With a grunt, he tossed it into the back of the car. I flinched as I heard it clatter against something metal. He slammed the trunk shut, the sound final, like a coffin closing. He gave me a brief, tight-lipped look from the driveway. "The donation truck comes on Tuesday for the furniture, Mom. Try to be ready." Then he got in the car, Melissa sliding into the passenger seat with a triumphant little smile, and they drove away. I was left alone on the porch of the house Arthur and I had built, the house where we raised our son, the house that was apparently no longer mine. A single tear finally escaped, tracing a cold path down my wrinkled cheek. I let it fall. I let the grief wash over me, the grief for my husband, the grief for the son I had lost. I felt utterly, completely, and devastatingly alone, and that, I knew, was exactly what they wanted. They saw a frail, heartbroken old widow, easy to push aside, easy to discard, just like her husband's junk. He thought he was just throwing out old memories. He thought he was taking the final step in seizing control of his father's estate, of my life. What my son David didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that he hadn't just thrown away a box of trinkets. He had just thrown away his entire future. I stood there on that porch for a very long time, until their car was just a bitter memory on the horizon. The silence they left behind was fast and cold. I closed my eyes, picturing the box. I saw it rattling in the trunk, a lifetime of love reduced to an inconvenience. The tear that had fallen was for my son, the boy I had lost. But the calm that settled over me now, that was for my husband. Because, you see, Arthur had known, he had seen this coming. What David didn't know, what Melissa, in all her sharp-edged, greedy brilliance, could never have guessed, was what was really inside that box. It wasn't just the medals, or the letters, or the faded ribbon. Tucked beneath a false bottom, hidden under a layer of worn velvet, lay a single folded envelope. And inside that envelope was Arthur's real last will and testament. My Arthur, he was a quiet man, a builder, a thinker. He wasn't a man of loud pronouncements, but he saw things. He saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. And in the last year of his life, he had begun to see David. He saw the subtle shifts in his character, the way his eyes would slide away when we talked about integrity, the growing obsession with money, with image. And then he saw Melissa. "She's a polisher, Clara," he'd murmured to me one night as we sat on the porch, the same porch I was standing on now. "A polisher, dear?" I'd asked, resting my head on his shoulder. "Yes, she finds something she thinks has potential, and she polishes it, not to make it shine, but to see her own reflection in it. Our David, he's just something for her to see herself in." I had defended David, of course. He was my son. "He's just in love, Arthur. He'll find his footing." Arthur had just squeezed my hand. "I hope so, my love. But hope is not a plan. A good builder always prepares for the storm." 2 months later, he was diagnosed. And as the illness progressed, his mind only seemed to get sharper, more focused. He called in his old lawyer, Mr. Henderson, not the slick new one David had recommended. They met for an entire afternoon. When Mr. Henderson left, he looked at me with a profound, sad respect. That evening, Arthur called me to his study. He looked frail against the dark wood of his desk, but his eyes were bright. He motioned to the mahogany box. "David will come for everything, Clara," he said, his voice thin but steady. "When I'm gone, he and that woman, they will see you as a loose end. They will see my life's work as a pile of assets." "Arthur, don't," I'd whispered, my heart breaking. "No, listen, it's important. I've signed 2 wills. The first one," he pointed to his desk drawer, "is the one he'll find. It gives him executorship, it gives him management of the company, it gives him exactly what he thinks he deserves. It leaves you with a life interest in this house, but it's paper thin. A lawyer like Melissa's will find a way to break it. They will believe they have won." He then slid the mahogany box across the desk. He showed me the tiny, almost invisible catch hidden in the carving. He lifted the false bottom, and there it was, the envelope. "This," he said, tapping it, "is the real one, the only one that matters. It invalidates the other completely. Mr. Henderson has the original signed copy, and this is my own, notarized and sealed. This one leaves everything to you, Clara. The house, the company, the accounts, everything, to be managed and dispensed as you see fit." I had stared at him, confused. But why? Why the first one? Why this game? "It's not a game," Arthur said, and his gaze was so intense I felt it to my very bones. "It's a test of character. I am giving our son a choice. If he is the man I raised, he will treasure you. He will care for you and this house and my memory. And if he is this new man, he will show his hand, and when he does, you will be protected." He'd made me promise. Don't show it to him, Clara. Not until he forces your hand. Not until he is at the very bottom of his own making. A man can't learn a lesson when he thinks he's on top of the world, only when he's crushed underneath it. And then he'd placed the false bottom back and laid his father's war medals on top of it. He had hidden the truth beneath the very memories David would so callously dismiss as junk. So, as I stood on that cold porch, I wasn't just a grieving widow. I was a gatekeeper. I was the silent executor of my husband's final, painful lesson. David and Melissa thought they were in control. They thought they were driving away with a trunk full of trash and a clear path to their new, wealthy life. They had no idea that they were, at that very moment, driving to the city dump to throw away the only thing that gave them any claim to that life. They had thrown away the will. They had thrown away their inheritance. They had thrown away the key to their entire future, all because it was hidden in a box of junk. My heart ached with the profound, tragic irony of it all. I felt a deep, piercing sadness for my son. He was so blind. I turned and walked back into the house, my house. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. They thought they were moving me to Sunrise Villa. They thought I was a frail old woman with no power. They were wrong. I wasn't a victim. I was an observer. And I was waiting. The first move had been theirs. The next would be their own undoing. Arthur had set the pieces. Now all I had to do was watch them play the game. My son had just made the worst mistake of his life. After David unknowingly threw away his inheritance, the real will hidden in his father's memory box, I was left alone in my house, waiting for their next move. I didn't have to wait long. The phone rang 3 hours later. I let it ring 5 times, a little trick to make myself sound slower, more confused. I shuffled my feet across the floor and picked up the receiver, making sure there was a breathless little hello. "Mom, it's David." His voice was too loud, too cheerful. It was the false brightness of a man trying to convince himself he's doing the right thing. "Just checking in. You're okay, right? The attic is done. That's the hardest part. You're holding up?" "David," I said, and I let my voice tremble. I didn't have to try very hard. The betrayal was still a raw, open wound. "The box. Your father's mahogany box. David, where did you throw it away?" A heavy sigh came through the line, the sound of a son at the end of his patience. "Mom, we talked about this. It's gone. We took it to the dump on the way home. It's done. You have to let these things go. You have to move on." I heard Melissa's voice in the background, sharp and clear. "Tell her we'll buy her a new box, a better one." "It's for the best, Mom," David repeated, his voice hollow, a mere echo of his wife's. "Look, I have to run, but Melissa is coming by tomorrow with Mr. Harrison, the estate agent. They're just going to finalize the listing." The listing? I played the part Arthur had assigned me, the confused, frail old woman. "For the house, Mom, we're putting it on the market, and she's bringing the forms for Sunrise Villa. It's all arranged. I told you. You're going to love it. They have, I don't know, a crafts circle or something?" I was silent. I let the silence stretch, filling it with my imagined, quiet sobs. I knew he would picture me on the other end, defeated and weeping. "Mom, don't cry, okay? It's a good thing. It really is. A new start for everyone." "Of course, dear," I whispered. "Whatever you think is best. I'm just very tired. I'll see Melissa tomorrow." I hung up the phone. The act was harder than I had imagined. To sound truly broken, you have to dredge up all the real pieces of heartbreak inside you. And I was heartbroken, just not in the way they thought. My heart ached for the son who believed a craft circle could replace a home, who thought moving on meant erasing the past. The next day, Melissa arrived. She did not come alone. She had the estate agent, a man with a smile as slick as his hair, and another woman she introduced simply as an appraiser for the contents. David, pointedly, was not there. He couldn't bear to see this part. Or perhaps Melissa hadn't allowed him to. She didn't want his weakness, his residual love for me, getting in the way. "Clara," she said, acknowledging me with a brisk nod. There was no hug, not even a kind look, just business. "This won't take long. They're just going to walk through and tag everything for the auction. You just try to stay out of the way, maybe sit in the kitchen." Stay out of the way? In my own home? I nodded meekly, my hands clutching my thin cardigan, and shuffled to the kitchen. From my seat at the small breakfast nook, I watched them. I was invisible. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the rooms I had once filled with love and laughter. Melissa moved through the living room with a brisk, proprietary air. The sideboard, definitely. The Persian rug? What's the thread count? This grandfather clock. It's a bit dated, but the casing might be worth something. She was liquidating my life. She was converting my memories into currency. The appraiser, a woman with equally cold eyes, would nod and place small green stickers on everything. Sold, sold, sold. I could feel a hot, sharp anger rising in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I pushed it deep, deep, and let the mask of the sad, confused old woman settle back over my features. This was Arthur's plan. Let them show their hand, and what a hand it was, full of greed, dripping with disrespect. David's calls became shorter, more functional. "Hey, Mom, just checking in." He was busy at the office, his office. I'd heard through the grapevine, old Mrs. Gable, whose husband Walter used to be on the board of Arthur's construction company, that David was making quite an impression. "He's very bold," she told me over the phone, her voice laced with a doubt she was trying to be polite about. "He fired the entire old accounting team, Tom and Jerry, and even Arthur's personal secretary. He's talking about a new logo, a rebrand, taking out a very large business loan, I hear, expanding into high-risk condos. Arthur was always so careful, so steady." "He's a young man, dear," I'd said, my voice sweet and airy, full of new ideas. But I knew what it was. It was Melissa's ambition, funded by Arthur's legacy. They were spending money they didn't have, celebrating a victory they hadn't won. They had found the first will, of course. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had reluctantly produced it upon David's formal request. David was the executor. He was in charge. He thought he had the keys to the kingdom. He had no idea the locks had been changed. He had no idea the key he held was a fake. The arrogance grew, as it always does when it's built on a lie. Melissa started posting photographs online. A new, gleaming black sports car, a champagne toast at a restaurant I knew Arthur found offensively overpriced. The caption read, "To new beginnings, wiping away the dusty old and embracing the future. #blessed." She was talking about my house. She was talking about me. My suffering was quiet, but it was real. At night, the house was so empty. I'd walk the halls, my hand trailing on the wallpaper Arthur and I had hung together in 1973. I'd sit in his study, in his big leather chair, and I'd run my hands over the empty, polished spot on the desk where the mahogany box used to be. The loss of my son, the real one, was a physical ache. I was mourning two men, in a way, my husband and the boy he had raised. Then, the day I was dreading arrived. The donation truck, the one David had mentioned for the junk. It rumbled up the driveway, large and white and final. Melissa was there to supervise, tapping her foot, a clipboard in her hand. "Now, Clara, don't get underfoot. This is just the last of the unusable items." I watched as two men in overalls began carrying out the older furniture. The guest bed, the small, water-stained table from the upstairs landing. Then they headed for the small, wooden rocking chair in the corner of the living room. It was nothing special. The blue paint was peeling, the seat worn smooth. "No," I said, my voice suddenly sharp, surprising even myself. Melissa turned, annoyed. "What now, Clara?" "Not that one." I stood up, moving faster than I had in weeks. I put my hand on the back of the rocker. "Your father, Arthur, he rocked David in this chair every single night when he had colic. I can't let it go. Please." Melissa sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound. She looked at the chair, saw its utter worthlessness. "It's filthy, Clara. It's an antique, and not in a good way. It doesn't even match the decor at Sunrise Villa." "I don't care," I said, my voice cracking, and this time the tears were 100% real. I was clinging to the last physical piece of my family. "Please, Melissa, Let me have this. It's all I'm asking for." She looked at me, at the old woman crying over a broken, peeling chair, and I saw the expression that sealed her fate. It was pity, a deep, condescending, dismissive pity. She thought I was pathetic. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, waving her hand at the movers. "Fine, leave it. The old woman can have her chair. We'll just have to add a moving fee to get it to the villa. It's an extra stop." She smiled, a small, tight smile of victory. She had won. She had taken everything, the house, the company, the money, and now, in her great charity, she was letting me keep the scraps. I sank into the chair, clutching the armrests, and wept. I wept for my son, for my husband, and for the sheer, ugly blindness of it all. Melissa patted my shoulder, a gesture as cold and dry as a dead leaf. There, you'll feel better once you're all settled in. A new start, remember?" She turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the sound of a battle she was convinced she had won. I stayed there, in my rocking chair, for a long, long time, surrounded by the green stickers of my liquidated life. I was the very picture of a defeated, helpless victim. And as I rocked back and forth, I thought, they had taken the house. They had taken the company. They had thrown away the real Will. They had left me with nothing but a broken-down chair. They had no idea that from this very chair, I had the perfect view to watch them fall. And Arthur, my wise Arthur, had known they wouldn't fall because of me. They would fall because of themselves. They moved me to Sunrise Villa the following week. The room was small, beige, and smelled of disinfectant and canned peas. It was perfectly, aggressively pleasant. I had my small bed, a dresser, and in the corner by the window overlooking a patch of unnervingly perfect lawn, my rocking chair. I settled into the life of a ghost. I attended the craft circles. I sat in the dining hall and pushed my food around my plate. I smiled wanly at the nurses. I was exactly who David and Melissa needed me to be, a problem that had been solved, an out of sight, out of mind mother. I was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. And there is no greater vantage point in the world than being invisible. The first whispers of the downfall came, as I knew they would, from Mrs. Gable. She called me on the shared phone in the hallway of the villa. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice a low, worried murmur. "I don't mean to gossip, but, well, it's about Arthur's company." I held the receiver, my hand steady. "Oh? Is everything all right?" "Well, that's just it. Nobody knows. You know David. Let go of Tom and Jerry from accounting. The new team he hired, they're all so young. And that big condo project he started, the one down by the old switching yard?" I think I heard him mention it," I said softly. "It's stalled, Clara, completely. Walter was talking to one of the foremen. They're saying the ground is unstable. They cut corners on the environmental surveys, and now, well, they're saying the foundation work is all wrong. They have to stop. There are liens." A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. A foundation issue. My Arthur was a man who believed in foundations. He used to say, "You can't build a strong life on a weak footing." He'd spent his life building things that would last, things with integrity from the ground up. And in less than 3 months, his own son had put the company's name on a project that was rotting from its very foundation. It was a terribly perfect, tragic metaphor. "Oh dear," I said, letting my voice sound faint. That sounds very serious." "Indeed," she said, and I could hear the unspoken judgment in her voice. Arthur must be spinning in his grave. I thanked her for the call, hung up the phone, and walked slowly back to my room. I sat in my rocking chair and looked out the window. Karma, I thought, is not a lightning bolt. It is a slow, patient undermining of the ground you stand on. 2 weeks later, the whispers became a rumble. I was in the common room pretending to read a large print magazine when I saw the local business journal on the cable. I didn't even need my glasses to see the headline on the front page: Hale Construction Assets Frozen. Ambitious condo project collapses amidst financing scandal. My hands trembled as I picked it up. There was a picture of David, not the smiling, confident one from Melissa's social media, but a grainy, candid shot of him hurrying into a building, his face pale and furious. The article laid it all out in cold black ink. David and Melissa had secured a massive loan, leveraging the company's entire asset portfolio, a portfolio built over 40 years of Arthur's careful, steady work. They had used that loan and all the liquid cash from the auction of my junk to fund the high-risk condo project. When the foundational issues were discovered, the project stopped, but the loan payments did not. The new accounting team, the bold young men David had hired, had apparently been cooking the books, trying to hide the spiraling costs from the bank. It was a desperate, amateur move. The bank, upon discovering the deception, had immediately called the full loan. They had frozen every asset. The company was paralyzed. It wasn't just the condo project, it was everything. Payroll was due. Suppliers for their other, smaller jobs hadn't been paid. The Hale Construction name, my Arthur's good and honest name, was being dragged through the mud. And I had done nothing. I had just sat in my room and knitted a very lopsided scarf. This was all of their own making. They had been given the keys to a kingdom, and in their haste to build a new, gaudy throne, they had torn out the load-bearing walls. I checked Melissa's social media, asking a kind nurse to help me see pictures of my family. The nurse cooed, "Oh, what a lovely daughter-in-law you have," as she pulled up the page. The feed was a wasteland. The daily posts about new shoes, fancy dinners, and her darling, brilliant husband had stopped cold a month ago. The last post was a dark, blurry image with a single bitter caption: "You really find out who your real friends are when the chips are down." The comments were few, and they were not kind. "Weren't you just bragging about your new car, Melissa? I heard they're repossessing it. What about all the people your husband fired? Are they your real friends?" The new, gleaming life they had built was a hollow facade, and it had shattered at the first tap of reality. I imagined the scenes at their new, high-end rental, the one they'd moved into after selling my home. I imagined the silence, thick and suffocating, broken by sharp, whispered accusations. "You told me this was a sure thing." "I told you to slow down." "You spent everything." "You pushed me into this." This wasn't a failure of business. This was a failure of character. This was the storm Arthur had predicted. I folded the newspaper and placed it back on the table. A woman across the room looked up from her puzzle. "Bad news, dearie?" she asked. I gave her a small, sad smile. "Just the world, I suppose. It's a complicated place." I went back to my room. I sat in my rocking chair, the one they had dismissed as worthless junk. The paint was peeling, yes, and the seat was worn, but it was built of solid oak. The joints were strong. Arthur had built it. It had a good foundation. I rocked, back and forth, back and forth. The motion was steady and patient. The downfall had begun. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the acrid smell of panic. They were falling, fast and hard, and they hadn't even realized that the only person who could catch them was the frail, confused old woman they had discarded. The phone in the hallway would ring again. I knew it. It was just a matter of when. The call came on a Tuesday. I know this because Tuesdays were tapioca pudding days in the dining hall, and the bland, milky taste was still on my tongue when I heard my name being paged over the intercom. "Clara Hale, you have a call at the front desk." My heart didn't race. It simply settled. It was the heavy, thudding certainty of a clock striking an hour it was always destined to strike. I walked slowly down the hallway, my hand trailing on the beige, textured wallpaper. I picked up the receiver. "Hello? Mom?" The voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the impatient, dismissive tone of the son in the attic. It wasn't the false, brittle cheerfulness of the son who had called to check in. This voice was hollow. It was a wreck. It was thin and cracked and sanded down by shame. "David," I said, allowing a note of simple maternal concern into my voice. "Is that you? You sound like you have a cold." A sound came through the phone. It was a half sob, half laugh, sharp and painful. "A cold, yeah, you could call it that, Mom." There was a long, terrible silence. I could hear him breathing, the ragged intake of air as he tried to find the words. I waited. I did not help him. This was a hole he had dug, and he would have to find his own way to ask for a ladder. "Mom, I need to see you. Can I come over, please?" "Of course, dear," I said softly. "You know where I am." I hung up and went to the common room. I didn't want him in my small, personal room. I didn't want his new, raw pain seeping into the one space that was mine. I sat in one of the hard-backed visitors' chairs near a wilting fern, and I waited. He arrived 40 minutes later. The woman at the front desk didn't even recognize him to call up. I saw him first, hovering in the doorway, and my breath caught in my throat. The change was shocking. He wasn't the bold young CEO from the newspaper. He was thin, gaunt almost. His expensive suit was wrinkled, as if he'd slept in it. His hair was unkempt, and he had a dark, patchy stubble on his cheeks. His eyes, his eyes. They were his father's eyes, and they were filled with a haunted, desperate emptiness I had never seen before. He looked like a man who hadn't truly slept in weeks. He clutched a single, worn briefcase in his hand. He saw me, and for a moment, he just stood there, paralyzed. He was a little boy again, lost in the woods, who had finally found the path home, but was terrified of the reception he'd get. I gave him a small, sad nod. "Hello, David." He walked toward me, his steps heavy, and sat down in the chair opposite me. He put the briefcase on the floor by his feet, as if it, too, were a great burden. He stared at his hands. "They took the house, Mom," he whispered. I just nodded. "The bank, the rental, the car, Melissa's car. They're taking everything." "I read about the company," I said gently. "There is no company," he said, his voice breaking. "It's gone. I leveraged it all." "All, I thought," Melissa said. "We thought." He shook his head, unable to finish the thought. "Where is Melissa?" I asked, my voice flat. His head snapped up, and the look in his eyes was a raw, agonizing combination of fury and heartbreak. She's gone. She left 2 weeks ago, the day the accounts were frozen. She packed her new bags. She said I ruined her. She said I was a fool and she wasn't going to go down with a failure. Arthur's words echoed in my mind. She's a polisher. She finds something she thinks has potential, not to make it shine, but to see her own reflection in it. David was no longer shiny, so she was gone. She took the last of the cash from the joint account, he continued, his voice dead. I have nothing. I've been staying on a friend's couch for 3 nights. He told me I had to leave this morning. He finally broke. The great, ambitious man who was going to rebrand his father's legacy, who had tossed his father's memories in a dumpster, buried his face in his hands, and he wept. He wept like a child, with great shuddering, gasping sobs that shook his entire body. I did not move. I did not go to him. I did not pat his back or shush him. I simply sat and I bore witness. This was the bottom. This was the crushing weight of the world that Arthur had spoken of. He had to feel all of it. After many long minutes, the sobs subsided into a ragged, wet breathing. He wiped his face on his sleeve, not even bothering with a handkerchief. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "Mom," he choked out, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. About the house, about everything." "I know, David," I said, and I did. I knew he was sorry now. He was sorry because his world had ended. I have nowhere to go," he whispered, the final, terrible confession. "I have nothing, no one. Mom, please, can you help me? I don't know what to do." Here it was, the plea. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I leaned forward, my face a mask of weary, sad resignation. "Help you?" I said, my voice as frail as I'd ever made it. "David, what do you think I can do? You and Melissa, you sold my home. You auctioned my belongings. You had me put here." His face crumpled in a fresh wave of shame. I know. I just thought, maybe there's something left. I shook my head slowly. The company is gone. The house is gone. Everything Arthur left. It's all tied up in your troubles. I let the word hang there. They take the fees for this villa right out of what's left. I have almost nothing. His last, desperate spark of hope died. He visibly deflated, slumping back into the chair. He was truly, utterly at the end. I waited a beat. "But," I said, and his head lifted just a fraction. "Your father, he set up a small annuity for me years ago, separate from the estate. He always worried. It's not much. It's barely anything. Just a little rainy day money, he called it." I looked out the window at the perfect, sterile lawn. I hate this place, David. I hate the smell. I hate this beige. I was thinking of using that little bit of money to rent a small apartment, a tiny one, just so I can have my own walls again, my own teacups. I looked back at him. His eyes were fixed on me, desperate, uncomprehending. "It's a 1-bedroom, I said. "A walk-up, I think, over on Maple Street. It's all I can afford. But I'm an old woman. My bones, they ache. I'd need help." I let the implications settle in. I can't. I can't pay a nurse. But I'll need someone to do the shopping, to cook, to clean. The apartment is far too small for 2 people, but there's a sofa." His breath hitched. He understood. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice incredulous. "I am offering you a roof, David," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "and I am offering you food. In exchange, you will be my caretaker. You will work for your keep. You will scrub my floors and carry my groceries, and you will listen to me when I talk about your father. You can sleep on the sofa until you can find a way to stand on your own 2 feet again." He stared at me, his mind clearly struggling to process the profound, humiliating reversal of fortune. He, who had tried to put me in a home, was now being offered a sofa. By me. He, the CEO, was being offered a job as a housekeeper. He didn't get angry. He didn't scoff. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the broken shell of a man. He slid out of his chair and onto his knees on the thin industrial carpet. He put his head in my lap, and his shoulders shook with a new, different kind of weeping. This wasn't the sound of panic. It was the sound of surrender. "Yes, Mom," he cried into my lap. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll do anything. Thank you. Thank you." I did not stroke his hair. I simply placed my hand on his head, a gesture that was at once a blessing and a burden. "Go and get your things, David," I said, my voice suddenly tired. "Wait, is that all you have?" I motioned to the briefcase. He nodded, his face still buried in my lap. "This is it." My heart ached. "All right then, I will make the call. We move tomorrow." The next afternoon, we stood in the doorway of a small, bare, 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up. The air smelled of dust and old paint. The only piece of furniture in the empty living room was my peeling blue rocking chair, which I had paid 2 men from my annuity to move. David stood in the middle of the room, his one briefcase by his feet. He looked lost. I shuffled past him and ran a finger along the kitchen counter. I held it up. It was thick with dust. "Well," I said, my voice clear and steady, "this won't do at all." I went to the small closet under the sink and pulled out a bucket and a sponge. I held them out to him. His hand, the hand that used to sign $1,000,000 contracts, trembled as he took them. "The kitchen floor is a bit sticky, dear," I said, moving toward my chair. "Let's start there." He looked at the sponge. He looked at the floor. Then he took a deep breath, filled the bucket in the sink, and got down on his hands and knees. The lesson had begun. We lived like that for 6 months. 6 long, quiet, arduous months. The tiny 3rd-floor walk-up on Maple Street became our whole world. David, my son, the former CEO, learned the rhythms of a life he had never known. His days, which had once been filled with hostile takeovers and slick presentations, were now filled with simple, humbling labor. He learned how to separate the laundry. He learned that I liked my tea with honey, not sugar, and that I liked it at precisely 4 o'clock. He learned how to budget, taking the small M I gave him from my annuity to the corner market, his face a mask of intense concentration as he compared the price of potatoes. I watched him. I watched the arrogance drain out of him day by day. It was like a long, slow fever breaking. The hard set of his jaw softened. The impatient, dismissive flicker in his eyes was replaced by a deep, hollowed-out weariness, which, over time, began to fill with something else: stillness. He didn't talk much at first. He just worked. He scrubbed the small bathroom, he did the dishes, he cooked simple, often lumpy meals. And every evening, I would sit in my blue rocking chair, the one piece of junk I had kept, and he would sit on the worn, lumpy sofa that was his bed. Tell me about Dad, he said one night. His voice was quiet, almost shy. Tell me about when he started the company. So I did. I told him about the early days, about the tiny one-room office, about the second mortgage on our house. I told him about the time your father used our own kitchen table as a drafting board for his first big contract. David just listened, his head bowed, his hands clasped between his knees. The change wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, quiet rebuilding. One afternoon, I was struggling to open a jar of pickles. My hands, twisted with a bit of arthritis, just couldn't get a grip. I sighed, frustrated. David was in the other room, polishing my shoes. He'd become meticulous about it. David, dear, could you? He was there in an instant. He didn't just take the jar. He gently took my hands in his. He looked at my gnarled knuckles. His own hands were not the smooth, manicured hands of a CEO anymore. They were rough. The nails were short, and there was a small healing blister on his palm from sweeping. He looked at my hands, and then he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like years. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, and I knew he wasn't talking about the jar. He opened it with a simple twist and handed it back to me. The moment of true remorse, the one Arthur had been waiting for, came on a rainy Thursday. I was in my chair, rocking, and I was talking about the mahogany box. I wasn't being cruel. I was just remembering. "It had your little blue ribbon inside," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "The one from the soapbox derby. Your father, he kept that on his desk for 20 years. He'd touch it sometimes when he was thinking. He was so very proud of you that day, David," he said. He said, "That boy, Clara, he knows how to build. He'll build something great one day." A sound came from the sofa, a choked, strangled sob. I stopped rocking. David was bent over, his elbows on his knees, his face in his hands. He was shaking. "Mom," he gasped, and the words were torn from him. I'm so sorry. I know I keep saying that, but I need you to know. I'm not sorry about the money or the company or Melissa. I am, but that's not it." He raised his head, and his face was a ruin of self-loathing and a pain so deep it was almost holy. "I'm sorry," he wept, for the box. "I'm sorry for the junk. I threw him away, Mom. I threw Dad away. And you, I was so ugly to you. I was a monster. He built everything for me, and I spit on it." He couldn't go on. He just wept, open-mouthed, like a child who has finally understood the magnitude of what he has broken. My heart ached for him, my son, my lost boy. He was back. I let him cry for a long time. Then I stood up slowly, my joints aching, and I shuffled over to him. I sat on the lumpy sofa, and I did what I hadn't done since he was a child. I pulled his head into my lap. I stroked his unkempt hair. "Shh," I whispered. "Shh, I know. After a long time, his breathing quieted. I looked down at the top of his head. "Your father knew, David," I said softly. "He knew this goodness was in you. He worried you lost the map home. He always said, A man can't learn a lesson when he thinks he's on top of the world, only when he's crushed underneath it. He looked up at me, his eyes confused. You said that at the villa. Yes, I said. He said it to me a long time ago. Now, go and wash your face. We have an appointment. An appointment? He said, his voice thick. With who? We don't have anything. Put on your best shirt, David. The one you were wearing when you came to me. It'll have to do. We are going to see Mr. Henderson. The confusion on his face was total. Mr. Henderson? Mom, why? He handled the will. It's done. There's nothing left. It's all gone. He told me himself. There is one last piece of business, David, I said, my voice firm. I called him from the payphone in the lobby yesterday. He's expecting us. He didn't argue. The last 6 months had taught him to trust me, at least in the small things. He washed his face, tucked in his wrinkled shirt, and we took the bus downtown. He sat beside me, his hands on his knees, staring straight ahead, a man walking to a fate he could not comprehend. We walked into the old wood-paneled office. Mr. Henderson stood up when he saw us. He was an old man, like me, with kind, sad eyes. He looked at David, and there was no judgment in his gaze, only a deep, profound pity. "Clara," he said, nodding to me. "David, please sit." We sat in the 2 leather chairs in front of his large mahogany desk. I don't understand, Mr. Henderson," David began, his voice rough. "Mom, why are we here? There's nothing left to probate." "David," Mr. Henderson said, his voice gentle. He folded his hands on his desk. "Your mother has informed me that certain conditions have been met, and that you have come to a new understanding of your, situation." "My situation?" David looked at me, lost. "Mom?" I took a deep breath. This was it, the final piece of Arthur's plan. "David," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room, "do you remember your father's mahogany box? The one you threw away?" He flinched, his eyes squeezing shut. "Mom, please, I can't. I know." "You called it junk, David," I continued. "Not to be cruel, but to be clear. You threw away your father's medals. You threw away my wedding announcement. You threw away your own blue ribbon. And you thought you were just clearing out clutter." I leaned forward. "But you also threw away this." Mr. Henderson, on cue, slid a thick blue-backed document across the polished desk. It stopped right in front of David. David stared at it. His hands were trembling. What is this?" he whispered. The will was... "That, David," Mr. Henderson said, "is your father's true and final will and testament. It was executed and filed with my office 1 week after the document you saw, the one you used, to secure your loans." David's face went white. He opened the document. His eyes flew across the first page, his finger tracing the lines. I don't understand," he breathed, his voice cracking. This. "I hereby revoke all previous wills. I leave my entire estate, real, personal, and mixed, including all shares of Hale Construction and all property, everything, to my beloved wife, Clara Hale, to be dispensed entirely at her sole discretion." He looked up, his eyes wide with a terrifying, dawning comprehension. He looked at me, not as a son, but as a man seeing a ghost. But, but, the, the villa, the apartment, he stammered, the annuity, my, my, my scrubbing the floors? I leaned forward, and the frail, confused old woman he had known for the past 6 months was gone. My voice was calm and steady, and it held the weight of all the love and all the pain of the last year. The apartment was a test, David. The annuity was a story. The scrubbing, that was your lesson. He just stared at me, the will clutched in his white-knuckled fist. Your father, I said quietly, wanted you to learn the difference between value and price. You knew the price of everything, dear, but you had forgotten the value of anything. I paused, letting the truth settle in the room. The company isn't gone, David, I said, my voice soft. It was never yours to leverage. The bank's claim was on you, the company's assets. My assets are and always have been perfectly safe. The silence that fell in Mr. Henderson's office was thicker and heavier than any I have ever known. It was the silence of a life coming undone, and perhaps another one beginning. David's hand, the one that had been clutching the will, went slack. The document, his father's true and final word, drifted from his fingers and settled on the polished desk like a fallen leaf. He didn't look at the will. He didn't look at Mr. Henderson. He looked at me. His eyes, the ones I had watched fill with arrogance, then with panic, then with shame, were now wide and unblinking. He was seeing me for the first time. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sallow gray. He saw the frail old woman in her beige cardigan, the one he had so easily dismissed, and he was finally, truly, seeing the woman who had held his entire world in her hands, who had patiently stood by and watched him burn his own life to the ground. You knew, he whispered. The words were not an accusation. They were a statement of pure, devastating awe. All this time, at the villa, in the apartment, you knew. I knew your father's heart, David, I said softly, and he knew yours. He knew the good man he had raised was still in there, buried deep. He left me a map in case you ever got lost. His mind was working quickly now, connecting the terrible, ironic dots. His gaze flickered, and a new, more profound horror dawned in his eyes. The box, he breathed. The mahogany box. It was in there, wasn't it? I simply nodded. It was under the false bottom, tucked beneath your blue ribbon. Your father hid his legacy underneath his memories, David. He trusted that the son he raised would treasure the memories, and if you didn't, you would have no claim to the legacy. A sound, a low, guttural moan escaped his throat. He understood at last. He hadn't just thrown away a will. He had failed the most important test of his life, a test he hadn't even known he was taking. He had been weighed, and he had been found wanting, all because he saw a box of love and called it junk. He didn't weep this time, as he had in the apartment. The shame was too deep for tears. It was a cold, systemic poison that had paralyzed him. He sat there, a statue of regret. "Mom," he said, and his voice was a dry rasp. I. He shook his head, unable to find the words. He stood up slowly, his movements stiff like an old man. But he didn't run. He didn't rage. He simply stood and faced me and took his judgment. What I did, he said, his voice clear, though trembling. It wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal, a sin. I didn't just fail, Mom. I I was I was a monster. I tried to throw you away. I threw him away. Sorry. That word it's just a noise. It's not. It's not big enough for this. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, breaking the spell. The legal situation is this, David, he said, his voice kind but firm. Your actions as executor of the fraudulent will are null. The bank's claim, the debts you incurred, are against you personally. David nodded, accepting the blow. I know. However, Mr. Henderson continued, Hale Construction was never yours to leverage. Its assets were and are protected. They belong to your mother. I have already intervened on the company's behalf. The liens are settled. The accounts are secure. Hale Construction is solvent, and its reputation is being repaired as we speak. It is, however, without leadership. David looked at me, his eyes now clear of any artifice, any hope for himself. He saw only the truth. No, he said quietly, it's not. It has a leader. It always has. He looked at me, at his mother. It's yours, Mom. What do you want me to do? He didn't ask for his job. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for a thing. He just asked what he could do. He was, at last, ready to serve. I let the silence sit for a moment. This was the true turning point. Not the reveal, but this, the question. What I want, David, I said, is for you to learn how to build again, from the ground up, the right way. I leaned forward. That condo project you started, the one on the faulty foundation, it's a disaster. It's a wound on the city, and it's a stain on your father's good name. The bank has washed its hands of it. The land is toxic. Forfeit. David's face tightened in shame. I know. I bought that land, I said, with a small part of my annuity. A very small, sad smile touched my lips, and he had the grace to flush. It's a useless, dangerous, toxic plot of land, and it is the first thing you are going to fix. His head snapped up, confused. Fix? Mom, it's unfixable. It has to be demolished. The ground is poison. Exactly, I said. You're not going to be CEO, David. You're not going to sit in an office. You are going to be on the crew. You will report to the site manager, a man named Tom, who you fired and who I rehired last month. David flinched, but he didn't protest. You are going to learn about soil remediation. You are going to learn about proper concrete curing. You are going to learn what a real foundation looks like. You're not going to build condos, David. You're going to clean up the mess you made with your own two hands. And when you're done, you're going to help me turn that land into a park in your father's name. This was his path. Not a path back to glory. Not a path back to wealth, a path to amends. He stood there, absorbing it all. The humiliation of working for the man he fired, the back-breaking, thankless labor of cleaning a toxic site, the years it would take. He did not falter. He simply nodded. A single, solid nod of pure, unadulterated acceptance. When do I start? He asked. Tomorrow morning, I said. 6 a.m. The bus route is on the kitchen counter. I stood up, my old bones creaking. He rushed to help me, his hand gentle on my elbow, but I waved him off. I could stand on my own. I walked to the door. Mom? He said, his voice quiet. I turned. You're still... You're coming back? To the apartment? I looked at my son, my broken, healing, learning son. Of course, I said. You're still on the sofa, David. Your work as my caretaker isn't finished. You haven't dusted the bookshelves yet this week. A small, watery ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first truly humble, genuine expression I had seen on his face since he was a boy. Yes, Mom, he said. I understand. Thank you. David's new life began before the sun rose. The alarm in his small corner of the living room would go off at 4:30 a.m. I would hear the creak of the sofa, the sound of the tap running as he splashed cold water on his face, the quiet click of the door as he left, his lunch pail, a second-hand one I'd bought at a thrift store, in his hand. He would return 12 hours later. He wouldn't just be tired, he would be caked in mud, his clothes stained with grease and chemicals, his face etched with his exhaustion so deep it looked like it was carved into his very bones. In those first few months, he would sometimes just stand in the doorway for a full minute, leaning against the frame, before he had the strength to take off his work boots. He would nod to me, his voice a low, rough rasp. "Evening, Mom." And I would nod back from my rocking chair. "Evening, David. Wash up. Dinner is on the stove." He never complained. Not once. He never complained about the bitter cold of the winter or the suffocating, toxic smell of the soil he was digging up. He never complained about Tom, his new boss, the man he had once fired. I knew Tom was hard on him. I had asked Tom to be. "He's quiet, Clara," Tom told me on the phone one evening when David was out buying groceries. "I'll give him that. He does what he's told." The other men, they know who he is. They give him the worst jobs, cleaning the portable toilets, hauling the heaviest bags of lime. He puts his head down and he does it. "Good," I'd said. "Keep him there. He's got a long way to go." After dinner, which he would often eat so tired he'd nearly fall asleep at the small kitchen table, he would clean. He would wash the dishes. He would sweep the floor. He would ask me if I needed anything, my medication, a cup of tea, my blanket. He was still my caretaker. This was still his penance. On weekends, his one day off, I would see him at the kitchen table, poring over books. Not business ledgers, books from the library. Introduction to Soil Science, Fundamentals of Civil Engineering, Native Plant Landscaping. He was studying. He was learning how to build from the ground up. The first year passed. The man who had left that morning was not the same man who had walked into Mr. Henderson's office. The softness of his boardroom body was gone. He was lean and hard. His hands, I noticed, were permanently calloused, the nails permanently rimmed with dirt that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. He looked, for the first time in his life, exactly like his father had. He looked like a man who worked. One Saturday, I came into the living room and found him on his knees by my blue rocking chair. He had a small can of wood glue and a clamp. "What are you doing, David?" I asked. He looked up, startled. The arm, Mom. It's been loose. I just wanted to fix it, if that's okay." He was, fixing the junk. I nodded, my throat tight. "That's fine, dear. That's very good." It took 2 years. 2 years of backbreaking, soul-crushing, and ultimately healing labor. The toxic soil was removed. The ground was remediated. New, clean earth was brought in. And slowly, a park began to grow. On a bright, clear October afternoon, we stood on a small, grassy hill. The Arthur Hale Memorial Park was being dedicated. It wasn't large, it wasn't grand, but it was beautiful. There were young trees, a small playground, and winding gravel paths. I, of course, had used my funds to buy back my house. The tenants who had been renting it were gone, and it was mine once more. But I had told no one. I had waited for this day. I was at a small podium. Mr. Henderson was there. Tom was there with his crew. A few families from the neighborhood had come. David was not up front. He was standing in the back, near the service truck, his work boots on, his arms crossed. He looked like one of the crew, which I suppose he was. He had no interest in the spotlight. He just watched, his face quiet. I gave a small speech. I thanked the community. I talked about Arthur and his love for building things that lasted. But I didn't do this, I said, my voice carrying in the clear autumn air. This park, this beautiful, clean, safe place, built on land that was once a poison, this was built by someone else. It was built by a man who learned the hard way what it means to build a true foundation. I looked to the back, and I locked eyes with my son. "David," I called out, "come up here." He flinched, as if struck. He shook his head, a small, panicked gesture. He did not want the credit. He felt he didn't deserve it. "David," I said again, my voice gentle but firm, "come." He walked slowly up the path, his head down, his hands jammed in his pockets. He stood beside me, his gaze on the ground. I turned to the small crowd. "This is my son, David Hale," I said. "When his father passed, he lost his way. He made a terrible mistake on this very land, and he has spent the last 2 years with his own 2 hands making it right." I looked at Tom. He didn't do this as a CEO. He did this as a laborer. He earned his place on this crew, and he has earned your respect. This is the first thing my son has truly built, and his father would have been so very proud. I put my arm through his, and I felt him shaking. I looked up at him, and I saw the one thing I had been waiting 2 years to see. The shame was gone. The arrogance was a distant, painful memory. The man beside me was at peace. He looked at me, and his eyes, his father's eyes, were full of a quiet, profound gratitude. He had made amends. He was redeemed. That evening, a taxi pulled up, not to the little apartment, but to the front walk of our old house, the house Arthur and I had built. David looked at it, confused. "Mom, where are we?" "I believe you called it a museum, dear," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I bought it back. I was tired of the beige." We walked inside. It smelled of lemon oil and old wood and home. The grandfather clock was in the hall. The Persian rug was on the floor. Everything was as it had been. "How?" he whispered, his eyes wide. "I am a very wealthy woman, David," I said simply. "I'm just not very good at living like one." I went to the living room and sat in my blue rocking chair, which I had had moved that morning. It sat in its rightful place by the fireplace. David stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he walked over to me. He was holding something. It was a box. It was not the old dark mahogany box. That was gone, lost to the landfill forever. This was a new one, made of a light, honey-colored oak. The joints were perfect. The finish was smooth as silk. It was beautiful. "What is this?" I asked, my voice thick. I've been taking a class," he said, his voice shy, "at the community center. Woodworking, like Dad. It's not very good. I'm still learning." He held it out to me. "It's for your memories, Mom. For the junk." His voice broke on the last word. So so you can keep them safe. I, I, I built it for you. I took the box from his calloused worker's hands. I opened it. It smelled of sawdust and glue and a new beginning. I looked at my son who had been lost and was now found, the son who had finally learned how to build. I pulled him down and I held his face in my hands and I kissed his rough cheek. "It's beautiful, David," I whispered, the tears finally coming. "It's the most valuable thing I have ever seen." And that, my dear, is the story of the greedy son who learned his lesson. Did I do the right thing? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. I have so many more stories to share. Please subscribe and join our family so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, this is Auntie Clara. Be good to one another.